There aren't many principles in my life that have made as significant an impact or difference as learning to draw and set personal boundary lines in my life. They are the key to personal, emotional, and relational freedom. And I want to share those with you as we set these personal boundary lines for 2025. The kind of boundary lines that allow a wife who feels like she's last on her husband's priority list and who's having a hard time keeping sense of her own self-worth and identity to set personal boundary lines and say, I don't like this. I don't like the way our relationship's working. I don't agree with this. I don't deserve this. I don't want to be treated this way. The kind of boundary lines that help explain why an executive who began his career full of hopes and dreams ends up 15 years later with feelings of fatigue and anxiety and depression, starts to miss deadlines, resents his boss for demanding so much of his personal time. You know how this goes. Marriage begins to fail. The kids get the leftovers. Life's out of control. It's getting away from him because of his failure to set and keep and guard personal boundary lines. Do you get the picture? I mean, can you see the importance of drawing boundaries? Boundaries are territorial lines that help define us, help define our relationships, help define our world without losing a sense of the separateness that helps us define who you and I are as individuals. You see, God created us to be social people. We need each other. We want to be in close contact with each other. We want to be in intimacy with each other. But just as we're connected, we're also to be distinct and separate. We're not to lose our sense of our own personal identity, of who we are as individuals. That's why boundaries are so important. Boundaries are the art of me being me without losing you. Boundaries help show us how we can become intimate and attached to other people and still remain as individuals. Boundaries help us define what's permissible and what's not. Boundaries help us from getting messed up emotionally and relationally in our lives. Boundaries keep the weaker of us from getting overpowered by the more dominant of us. Boundaries define and tell us where our life begins and where it ends in relationship with others. It's the skill of loving yet setting limits, of being connected yet separate. It is the essence of our pathway to growth and adulthood. And I want you to understand these in 2025. So let me define for you some basics of setting personal boundaries. First, boundaries are not a feeling. Boundaries say, I love you, but I'm not responsible for your personal feelings or your personal happiness. You see, boundaries help us to learn how to love someone without being responsible for how they feel. Boundaries allow a 35-year-old career single woman to tell her mother, I'm not coming home for Thanksgiving. I've been so busy at work, I just don't think I can fly home. I can't get there. Even though she knows that her mother is going to go crazy. I mean, her mother is going to have a heart attack if she doesn't go home for Thanksgiving, if she doesn't make her mother happy. She knows her mother's going to get really angry, but she also knows that she's really exhausted in her job and her work, and it's not in her best interest at this point. As many sacrifices as she's made for her mother, at this point in her life, it's not the time to be getting totally exhausted and drained. She needs to begin to take care of herself. The trouble is, she knows, making my mother feel good makes me feel so bad. So boundaries help the daughter know that her mother's anger is her mother's problem. It's not the daughter's behavior, it's how the mother feels. Jesus wants us to learn to take responsibility for our own attitudes and not someone else's. That's what that mother needs to do. You recall the story in Matthew 21-15, where there's workers that are hired out in the field. Some are hired very early in the morning at the crack of dawn. 3 hours later, the manager hires other workers. 3 hours, he hires some more. Finally, he hires at the end of the day, when there's very little time left to go, he hires some more workers. At the end of the day, everybody gets paid. Remember the story that Jesus teaches us? Everybody gets paid. Now, here's what happens. Those that were hired last and only worked an hour or so got paid as much as those that had worked all day long. And those that worked all day long are upset. We bore the burden of the work. We worked in the heat of the day when it was hardest. We worked all day long. And you're just going to pay those people that signed up at the end the same as you're going to pay us? But Jesus replied at the end of the story. He replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarii? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to the last workers as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge me my generosity?" Jesus is telling them, I'm not being unfair to you that have worked all day long. Did we not agree that you'd work for a denarii, for $1? Now take your wages, take your dollar, your pay, and go home, joyfully, happily. But it's my prerogative. I want to give to the man who was hired at the end of the day, the same as I gave to you. And I have a right to do what I want with my money. It's my money. You see, Jesus is saying your feelings come from your envy, from your sense of being taken advantage of being left out, of being on the outside looking in. But that's your problem. You need to deal with your attitude. Your attitudes are your attitude. Your problem is not mine. Your attitudes are not mine. I love you. I support you. But I am not responsible for your happiness or your feelings. Boundaries. Draw lines. I'm not responsible for your happiness or your feelings any longer. 2, boundaries are a choice and a decision. The young woman wants to celebrate Thanksgiving with her friends. She's exhausted. She doesn't want to fly home. She'd just like to chill out, hang out with some friends, and get restored for when work comes again on Monday. But the mother wants her home. You see, the daughter feels like she has no choice. Her mother is making her come home. In reality, the daughter has always chosen to go home to please her mother instead of herself. So she feels like her mother is to blame. She resents her mother. That blame turns to resentment. She doesn't realize that she has made a choice that she's now making by saying, "Mom, I'm not coming home." She could have chosen to say to her mother, "I love you, but I'm 35 and I'm exhausted from work and I choose to chill out with my friends. I'm sorry you're angry at me." But that's something you'll have to deal with. And that's a decision that the daughter will have to learn to live with. It's the pathway to freedom and adulthood. Boundaries say, make your own decisions. Think for yourself. If we don't feel like we have a choice, if we feel like we're under the control of someone else, that it's out of our control, we'll resent those people. We'll resent them. We'll perceive them as having control in our lives, and boundaries want to free us up from that kind of resentment and control. You see, choices have 2 directions, a yes direction and a no direction. I can choose to do something, and I can choose not to do something. Think about it. Our choices, your choice and my choice, they determine the direction of our lives. This is the essence of having a sense of boundaries. So, don't resent, grumble, complain, gripe, gossip. Ask the question instead, where do I need to draw boundary lines? Where do I need to make choices in my life? And where do I need to learn to live with those choices so that I can feel good about myself and good about a sense of personal freedom? You see, boundaries are good for us. They allow, for instance, a young mother to take a break from preschoolers who are permanently attached to her leg without feeling guilty. They allow her to say, I'm a person too, and I love my kids more than I could possibly imagine, but I need some time for myself. That restoration will actually make me a better mother. I need to feel good about taking that time. Boundaries are a choice and a decision to set us free. And finally, setting boundaries are an action. It's something I do. God set up an ordered universe. And he said, if you behave in certain ways, certain things will happen. He set up the law of physics. For every action, there's a predictable result, another action. God set up boundaries like that for the way that things work. There's no mystery to them. There's no magic. There's stardust. They're like the laws of the universe, like the law of gravity. We can cause good things to happen by our actions. If you want to stay healthy, eat healthy foods and exercise. If we want to pay off the mortgage, we have to go to work and we have to be disciplined to manage our finances properly. If we want to build good relationships, we have to set boundary lines, clear boundary lines, healthy boundary lines in our lives. We can cause bad things to happen. I mean, if you're lazy and you don't study, you'll flunk out of school. If you don't steer the car, it will crash. Don't show up for work, you won't get paid. Beat up the ones around us, the ones we love, we lose intimacy. We lose relationship. But people who obey property lines, who set boundaries, feel in control of their lives. They pray, they work hard, they tell the truth, they ask for help, they take care of their bodies, they make friends, they behave in ways that bear fruit. Drawing boundary lines and putting them into action is the most healthy thing we can do. That's the way that we get somewhere, that we move forward. If you're feeling stuck in life, draw some boundary lines. Learn to say no. Learn to put what you believe, what your values are, what you need, learn to put that into action. So boundaries are not a feeling, they're a choice and a decision, and they are an action. Boundaries are something that we do. So I have some questions for you. Where can you draw boundary lines in your life this year in 2025? Where can you draw those? What kind of choices do you need to make in your life in 2025? What kind of choices about boundary lines? And what kind of boundary line actions do you need to take this very day? I mean, write these things down. Boundary lines. Where can you draw them in your life? What choices do you need to make? What actions do you need to put into practice in your life? Boundary lines will set you free and give you a strong sense of personal identity and worth in 2025. They will. Set personal boundary lines. They are the key to personal, emotional, relational freedom.